Right now in Cyprus, Israel has a colonization plan and major influence on the island. Today, I'm here with Elina Xenophontos. She's an international law and globalization specialist to talk to me about what's going on in Cyprus. Alina, you live in Cyprus right now. Uh, what's going on the island, and how does Israeli influence play a role?
So, what's going on right now on the island is that we're seeing a massive influx of not just, Israeli citizens who are mass purchasing land in the country, but we're also seeing a huge integration between the current establishment here in Cyprus and Israel. We've seen, obviously, the announcement of the recent defense pact between Israel, Greece, and Cyprus. And that defense pact is something that is rather concerning because what they're trying to do, and I think it was maybe the Economist had said it. I can't remember who it was. They've even labeled it as the NATO of the Eastern Mediterranean. And what that essentially is supposed to do is it's meant to directly target Turkey to strengthen Israel's position within, obviously, the Eastern Mediterranean, its ability to surveillance Palestine, Lebanon, the resistance front, to take control and influence the Suez Canal, among other things. And also, in part of the defense pact that they've established, it's also includes anti-terrorist, I guess, actions, which means the suppression of internal discontent within the countries involved. That would be Cyprus, Greece, and Israel. And in, this would this they've already started engaging in massive military drills, and Cyprus is very important in that context because in the past, Israel has used Cyprus as an area where they can practice war drills, because our I guess the Cyprus landscape is very similar, in fact, identical to that of Lebanon, particularly the south of Lebanon, um, and therefore training here allows them to supposedly better be able to target the resistance inside of Lebanon, but also by placing themselves here, it's going to be acting as a backup for any future confrontation, whether it be with Iran or Hezbollah. Cyprus military bases and other even commercial airports and infrastructure are going to be used if Hezbollah actually targets Israel. And in fact, this is probably one of the main reasons why, Saeed Hassan Nasrallah, before he passed in May of 2020, uh, f- uh, five, no, four, sorry, it's been a while now. He had actually said, he had warned Cyprus. That's why he had warned Cyprus at the time to not allow its infrastructure to be used by Israel. And if it does, it's considered to be a legitimate target. So Israel is gradually taking over in Cyprus. Politically, it's infiltrated our government rather substantially. It also now is becoming one of the main water supplies to Cyprus, who's facing its own drought. And this is part and parcel of, Israel's main policy in the region, as we all struggle here in West Asia with obviously water supply. They have ample amounts of water supply, which is mostly based on theft, that they've been able to accumulate, and they use that as means to take control over periphery areas. And they're doing the same thing in Cyprus, meaning that now Cyprus, it's one of its most vital resources, water, access to water, is tied to Israel, including and not limited to, like I said, obviously all the massive amount of Israelis that are coming into Cyprus. And in fact, they're establishing exclusive areas that's just for Israelis, including even close to my particular location. And these areas where they're building their synagogues, schools, etc., there's massive security around them where local Cypriots have no access. And the reason they have no access is that they're using, obviously, the security concerns overall to provide the security around these regions. But what it is basically like they're establishing enclaves,
Yeah.
and they're gradually expanding, which isn't really different to what they did in Palestine. Yeah, go
Yeah,
on.
no, so that's so interesting. I want to talk a little bit more about that. Would you call it colonization? What are not the government, but let's talk more about the Israelis that are coming. What is their intent? Is their intent just to have getaway homes? Does it feel like they're trying to colonize the island? What is the intent? And then how are the people of Cyprus reacting? Do they feel like it's a colonization, or do they feel like it's just Israeli timeshares in the area?
So that's the thing. There's two things. So, firstly, I would define it as a form of colonization because Cyprus was, for those that don't know, Cyprus was actually considered historically by the leaders of Zionism back in the later 1800s to be a potential territory to be part of Israel. And in fact, in that time period, they tried to purchase and they tried to take over Cyprus three times between 1893 and obviously 19 and the later 1930s. And the idea was that Cyprus was supposed to be part of what they called Greater Palestine, because the leaders of Zionism at the time did not believe that Palestine was a big enough territory for them. They wanted bigger and more expansive territory that would obviously include Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and Cyprus, but even Rhodes Island of Greece. So they had, and Egypt, of course, parts of Egypt. So like the territory that they wanted was quite expansive, but Cyprus was rather integral to that. And in fact, there was even a plan that was laid out, and we find this in the letters that were exchanged between the British and the Zionists at the time. The idea was to carry out a forceful population transfer where they were going to expel the Christian population of the island, leaving only the Muslim population, and then repopulating the island with Jews, essentially. However, that plan failed fundamentally because there was a lot of anti-colonial resistance movements that were occurring in Cyprus at the time that were very violent, and they were becoming increasingly more hostile to the Jewish migrations that they initially had brought to the island. And so they had eventually, in combination with all the other resistance movements that were occurring even in Palestine, the British were unable to manage that. But also the British had their own agenda for that, being that they didn't want to lose control over Cyprus because of its access to the Suez Canal. This has always been part of their grand project. And in fact, going back to even documents, I think policy papers and research papers that were published by even the University of Tel Aviv in 2007 and again in 2010, uh, they were titled "Why Cyprus is Still Integral, Why Cyprus is the Springboard to the Aliyah," and that Cyprus should remain part of the Zionist plan because it allows for greater periphery control and surveillance over Palestine and the broader region. So this mass influx and this renewed interest, so to speak, isn't necessarily new, but it's been part of an ongoing Zionist plan that can only, yes, be described as a form of neocolonialism or basically direct colonialism, and that's the one thing. And then the second issue, and the main reason as well that Israel is so embedded in Cyprus is because of Turkey. They want to be able to leverage power against Turkey because obviously the northern part of Cyprus is occupied, and so. Um, I don't know if you're aware of this, but Israel Hayom in July of 2025 had actually published a paper, and now this has become quite a kind of reoccurring theme in Israeli media, claiming that the Cyprus problem is an Israeli problem, and that why Israel should consider, and I quote this, the liberation of Cyprus from Turkish occupation. The irony, I know,
Wow.
I know. And so there is plans that have been laid out, and this is why Cyprus as well. They've also been selling to Cyprus and giving them Israeli air defense systems. The idea is apparently to try to liberate Cyprus from the Turkish occupier, because according to them, the Turkish occupation in the north, which is a largely unrecognized state, with the exception of Turkey itself, is being used by Iranian intelligence and Hamas. They're claiming that Hamas is also in the north of Cyprus,
Of
and
course they
so
are.
in order to, yeah, Hamas is everywhere. It's also Venezuela and Mexico. Hamas is truly a very powerful source. But they're also in the northern part of Cyprus, and they're claiming that it's becoming a threat to Israelis' national security interests, and therefore they're trying to push against, I guess, getting Turkey out. However, these threats don't really exist. What Israel really wants and why they're securing themselves in the region is to push back against Turkey, who itself, being in Cyprus, now also occupies territory in Syria, has also, has massive influence in the north of Lebanon, as well as Libya, is looking to become its own energy and power hub in the region. This would significantly weaken Israel's influence in the region, but also the United States, which is why, as well, in the US, we've seen massive reports coming out from the Atlantic Council, among many others, who are stating that Turkey needs to be essentially stopped. Because that's the thing. If Turkey becomes too powerful in the region, then the United States would have to contend to collaborating with Turkey as opposed to, I guess, calling the shots. The same thing goes with Israel, and they want complete dominion over the region as a whole.
Yeah.
So by infiltrating Cyprus or getting rid of Turkey, because we have to remember the whole reason it's for Turkey having the north of Cyprus is a huge strategic base that they have wanted, and this goes back to the Johnson Plan of 1964 and the division of Cyprus that actually was pretty much planned out by the United States way before the 1974 war. And Turkey had actually always wanted the north of Cyprus because it provides access. It's a key military post for it and also a surveillance area. So by pushing Turkey out or of that particular area, it weakens Turkey, and it's also supposed to be, and I quote, a counterbalance because Turkey now wants to have a quite a predominant role in the Gaza, I guess, the international
Plan.
security force in Gaza. Israel does not want this. This is why when there was the huge meeting that took place, I think a month ago, with all these states invited in order to establish the International Security Force, Turkey was specifically not invited by the U.S. and Israel. And they've also said that if Turkey is to have any say inside of Gaza, then Israel will try to have its own say in Turkey. This is a kind of leverage. Its own Israel have its own say. Sorry, in Cyprus. So this is the type of leverage that Israel right now is trying to pull. What we're seeing is a clash that's happening within West Asia as a whole. So, where we saw Israel and Turkey in the past, there were allies, especially in Syria, including Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE. We're now seeing a lot of fracturing going around because everybody had their own interests to preserve their own power in the region, but now their interests are beginning to clash. And that's why we're seeing everybody sort of we're seeing like this inter-conflict that's occurring. The same thing is happening in Yemen between Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and that's also happening between Israel and Turkey and Cyprus. Unfortunately, and this is because you and to answer your question about how the Cypriots feel, Cyprus is a pretty good victim for that because Cyprus, unfortunately, is already a divided population due to obviously the British colonialism and how they created these internalized dichotomies and identities based on religion in Cyprus. So, for example, for those that don't know, we have what's defined as Greek Cypriots, Turkish Cypriots, Arab Cypriots, Armenian Cypriots, and so on. Before the British colonization of Cyprus, these these titles did not exist. You merely had a Cypriot local population who had different religious ideologies. Even under the Ottoman millet system, you just had Muslims, Romni, which meant Christian Orthodox, etc. When the British took over, they changed these and created ethnic identities out of religious identities, and they started creating these little systems of, like legal councils that separated. It created segregation among the Cypriot population, and then even when there was a pan-Cypriot, move for independence, the British had worked with the church to pacify that as a means to retain their own control. But that created a lot of internalized divides and ideological divides. And there's obviously a huge history that I can't get into now, but they stand until today a history of a lot of violence and obviously the events that happened in 1974 with the CIA backed coup with the junta of Greece, and then obviously the Turkish occupation that followed after that. So Cyprus is a divided country already with a lot of internal conflicts. And so many there, so the Cypriots can go either way. There are those, particularly those of left leaning tendencies, that are very against. Israel, what's happening to this country? They can see that there is this attempt to colonize and take over the island, and we're seeing these imperialist powers take advantage of the island, using it as still. I mean, Cyprus, I would say, still functions as a colony. This is the unfortunate reality, and there
Mm.
are other Cypriots who don't mind allying with Israel, not because they don't understand it as being a problematic actor, but because their idea, the way they think is, well, maybe it's better to work with Israel if it means pushing Turkey out. So they're capitalizing on this sentiment, on all these, the frictions that already exist in the society to create these allegiances. And so that this is kind of how the Cypriot population, for the most part, I would say it's rather divided, but for the most part, most Cypriots, I would say, are not happy with the Israelis that are on the island. They are very wary. There's a lot of discontent, but they don't seem to know how to be able to handle it. This is how Cypriots, I think, are, for the most part, reacting. Because I'll just say this: there was by Cyprus Mail, they had actually conducted a poll, and they had asked, especially young Cypriots, how they felt about the state's relations and how they've been dealing with Israel, and over 83% had said they were very dissatisfied. So we can see that most people are not happy, but they don't seem to know how to approach it. And Like I said, there's also that external fear, and the way Turkey's always used as a means to placate the masses into complacency.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you say that Turkey right now has the upper hand in Cyprus, or do you feel like they're system like slowly losing that?
So Turkey has a very powerful military. That's something that, nobody can take away from them. They have a very strong military. The weakness that Turkey has is its economy, and this is basically being used and can be abused, particularly by Israel, but also by the United States, because it relies on the dollar, because of the massive levels of inflation and the instability of the Turkish lira. A lot of, most businesses inside of Turkey and otherwise use the, cryptocurrencies, but also the dollar. They rely on their dollar for businesses. They are one of the most dependent on the dollar. And so any sort of fluctuations, because of the volatility of its own economy, can instantly trigger a massive, economic, not collapse, I would say, but crisis inside of Turkey that would demoralize Erdogan. So I think Erdogan is very aware of this. So even though militarily they have the capacity to have the upper hand, because they do, economically they don't. And unfortunately, something that people don't always understand is that warfare is not just military, it's economic, sort of like the same thing as what's happening to Iran, etc. It's economic. And so Turkey can easily be coerced into submission by just making small fluctuations or even small sanctions that could trigger the Turkish economy. And let's not forget, there was a lot of public discontent and all the protests that occurred in Turkey just last year against Erdogan. So you can see that this is another very politically volatile state. And so the West can undermine Turkey's authority through other means. But like I've said before, I think the unfortunate reality for Cyprus is, and I want to say this as well, why Cyprus is also important, something I didn't mention, but I will mention it now, is the Eastern Mediterranean corridor, which is part of IMEC. And IMEC is obviously the international trade routes that the US and the West want to establish in order to push back against the Belt and Road Initiative, which is China's obviously international trade, I guess, aspirations. And Cyprus falls very much in place with the IMEC corridor. And so seeing as well that in the United States, I think in the summer last year, in August last year, we saw renewed interest in the Turkish occupation of Cyprus in the north, and that they actually had put forward a demand to have a report within 6 months to see to what extent the Turkish occupation of the north threatens the United States. We're seeing the United States, I guess, take a very huge interest now in the north of Cyprus. And I think the future of Cyprus is not going to be defined by the will of Cypriot people and what they want. And what we want is a one-state solution where all Cypriots can live peacefully side by side. Our future, unfortunately, is most likely going to be defined by the external imperialist actors, meaning what's going to happen, what kind of truce or not is going to be met between Israel and Turkey, as well as the United States. If Turkey is able to meet some sort of truce with Israel, then maybe division will be the ultimate end. If, however, Turkey keeps pushing back, we might see a push to expel Turkey from the north, because there have been these conversations. And we are seeing a push from the United States to limit Turkey's influence. And they have actually requested that if Turkey wants to keep its position in the north, its occupation in the north, it has to allow the United States to establish its own bases there. So it's going to, again, it boils down to the agreements that are going to be made by other external, much powerful actors, and not really what the Cypriot people want. because just in November there were elections in the north of Cyprus, and the Cypriot population there, the Turkish-speaking population of Cyprus there, they voted that they for a candidate that wants a one-state solution, and that was to that really displeased Erdogan and Turkey, who really want to push for a two-state solution in Cyprus so that they can cement their control. So unfortunately, yeah, this is how power politics works, and that's kind of what's happening in Cyprus at the moment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Alina, thank you so much for your time today. Where can people find more of your work?
Yeah, so you can find my work. I write a lot of articles, but also do videos which go on Substack and my Patreon. I also do have a YouTube channel, which I'm working on, even though there are just two videos on there. But I am growing. I could do more deep dives there, so about 45 minutes of very deep analysis. And yeah, if you do social media, I do post a lot of videos as well, educational content on my Instagram, and I'm also a frequent contributor on Colonial Outcast. So that's where you can find me. I do a little bit of everything.
Perfect. And I'll make sure to include that all in the caption below. Thank you so much for your time. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on, Willie.